From 30,000 feet, the bottom of Louisiana looks like something the continent is still deciding on. The solid ground gives out gradually, fields, then swamp, then marsh, then a lace of green threads and open water, until the river itself pushes out into the Gulf on 3 long fingers of mud. On the map, it is labeled simply the Mississippi Delta. Most people carry a clear picture of this place. The Delta is where America's greatest river has always met the sea. Old land, deep land, mud stacked up since before anyone was counting. Bayous, cypress, shrimp boats. Further north, the other delta, the flat cotton country of Clarksdale and Highway 61, where the blues came from. Ancient, permanent, natural. That picture is not wrong exactly. But start with one small thing. The famous Mississippi Delta, the blues delta, the one in the songs, is not a delta at all. It is an inland floodplain in northwest Mississippi, roughly 7,000 square miles of it, sitting about 300 miles upstream from the river's actual delta in Louisiana. Farther from the river's mouth than Boston is from Washington. The most famous delta in American culture is pointing at the wrong spot on the map, and the real one, the one at the bottom of the map, is stranger still. What the Mississippi Delta actually is, underneath the version most people carry, is not a landscape at all. It is an ongoing intervention, and it is losing. If you like looking underneath familiar places, subscribing helps us keep making these. Because beneath that quiet aerial view, there is a set of steel gates holding an entire river against its will. There is land younger than the fall of Rome, dissolving on a measurable clock, and there is one structure, in a rural parish most Americans have never heard of, that the whole arrangement depends on. Drive the levee roads of Concordia Parish, Louisiana, and you will eventually come to a place where the landscape turns industrial without warning. Concrete piers rise out of brown water, steel gates hang between them, power lines, warning signs, a low continuous roar. It looks like a dam, but it isn't holding back a reservoir. It is holding back a decision. Here is the version most people assume. The Mississippi flows past Baton Rouge and New Orleans, because that is its course rivers. Go where rivers go, the map is simply a picture of nature. What the record shows is different. For most of the last century, the Mississippi has been trying to leave. A few miles west of this spot runs the Atchafalaya River, a shorter, steeper path to the Gulf, roughly half the distance of the river's current route. Water does not sentimentally prefer the long way around. Between 1850 and 1950, the share of the combined flow slipping into the Atchafalaya grew from under 10% to about 30%. The river was switching channels, the same thing it has done over and over across thousands of years. And in 1953, the Army Corps of Engineers ran the numbers and concluded that, left alone, the capture could be complete by around 1990. Think about what that means. Not a flood, a relocation. The Mississippi below this point, the river that Baton Rouge drinks, that the petrochemical corridor is built along, that makes New Orleans a port, would become a brackish backwater, while the main river carved a new mouth 100 miles to the west. So, Congress ordered the river to stay. Since 1963, the old river control structure has enforced a fixed ratio, written into federal policy like a law of physics, that had to be legislated because physics disagreed. 70% of the flow continues down the Mississippi, 30% is released into the Atchafalaya. 70-30. Every hour, every day, for over 60 years. The Corps even brought in Hans Albert Einstein, a leading hydraulic engineer, and the son of Albert Einstein to help work out the sediment problem in the design. And the arrangement has already come close to failing once. In the Great Flood of 1973, the river scoured out the foundation beneath the low-sill structure, undermining it while millions of cubic feet per second hammered through the gates. The structure held, barely, and the near miss is the reason an auxiliary structure was added in 1986. Stand at the low sill during high water today, and you can feel it in the concrete. 11 steel gates, vibrating, brown water, boiling through on the Atchafalaya side. That railing is the exact point where the continent's plumbing is held shut. This is the fact that reorganizes everything else about the delta. The land at the bottom of Louisiana, every marsh, every bayou town, the port system, the city of New Orleans, sits downstream of a machine and exists in its current form because the machine keeps winning. New Orleans is a river port today because of gates on a structure 200 miles upstream that most Americans have never heard of. The Mississippi does not flow past New Orleans because nature wants it to. It flows there because a machine forces it to. That is the first layer. But to understand why the river keeps trying to leave, you have to understand how young this land actually is. In 1541, Hernando de Soto's expedition reached the Mississippi near present-day Memphis. At that moment, the modern Birdfoot Delta, the three-fingered river mouth on every map of Louisiana, did not yet exist in its current form. The land at the very bottom of the United States is, geologically speaking, newer than European contact with the river that built it. The numbers run like this. The entire South Louisiana Delta Plain is only about 7,000 years old. It was assembled, lobe by lobe, as the river swung back and forth across the coast, building land in one spot for roughly 1,000 to 1,500 years, then abandoning it for a shorter path and starting again somewhere else. Geologists count 5 to 6 major lobe complexes stacked and overlapped along the coast. The current one, the Birdfoot, began forming only about 1,000 years ago, with its newest extensions just a few centuries old. Before roughly 7,500 years back, the footprint of coastal Louisiana, as we know it, simply was not there. The abandoned lobes did not vanish politely. They sank, eroded, and became the geography everyone thinks of as timeless: the bays, the estuaries, the barrier islands. The Chandler Islands are the ghost shoreline of a delta lobe. The river walked away from centuries before Columbus. So look again at what the old river control structure is actually doing. Channel switching is not a malfunction. It is the delta's entire method, the conveyor belt, that built every acre of South Louisiana. The Atchafalaya is not an anomaly threatening the river. It is the next lobe, on schedule, being held back by steel. The ground under Plaquemines Parish is younger than Baghdad, younger than the Vikings. The delta's whole existence fits inside recorded human history, which means it was never permanent land in the first place. It was a process. We stopped the process mid-motion in 1963 and called the frozen frame a map. The delta is not ancient ground. It is a 1,000-year-old temporary structure that we froze in place, the Big Muddy. That is the river's whole reputation, a current so thick with continent that Twain's pilots read it like a text. Most people assume that river still arrives at the delta the way it always has, and that deltas do what deltas do: grow. The measurements say otherwise. Since the 1,950 seconds, the suspended sediment load of the Mississippi has fallen by roughly half. The main reason is upstream and invisible from Louisiana. More than 50,000 dams across the river's basin, each one a trap where the continent's mud settles out into a reservoir instead of riding the current south. Take the longer view, back to 1850, before the modern levee era, and the decline in the lower river sediment is estimated at more than 70%. The muddy Mississippi is running at a fraction of its historic payload. And here is the stranger half of the problem. Even the mud that still arrives mostly never touches the delta it is supposed to sustain. The river runs to the Gulf between continuous flood protection levees, which means the annual overbank flooding that once spread fresh sediment across the marshes. The delta's entire maintenance system has been eliminated. The remaining sediment is piped straight down the channel and fired off the edge of the continental shelf into deep water. On satellite images, you can watch it happen. A brown feather of mud jetting past the last fringe of green marsh and dissipating over blue water. Land building material visibly thrown away. The consequences are now measurable underwater. Research from LSU-affiliated scientists found that the Birdfoot Delta, which had been advancing into the Gulf for centuries, has stopped growing and entered retrogradation. The delta front itself is retreating. A delta is a running balance. Mud in, sinking, and erosion out. The delta is a patient on an IV drip that has been cut in half, and the half that still flows is being injected past the patient into the sea. The engineering that made the river safe is the same engineering that is deleting the land the river built. If you have driven through South Louisiana, or if you grew up anywhere along this river, from Minnesota to the Gulf, tell us in the comments what you thought this place was. The comments on these videos are always the best part. And stay with this one, because the next layers are where the picture gets genuinely strange. 76,247. That is the number of oil and gas wells permitted in Louisiana's 14 coastal parishes. Between 1900 and 2017, in a marsh most people picture as trackless wilderness. The bayou country's reputation is wildness, a maze no straight line has ever entered. But fly over it and the marsh reads like a printed circuit. Beginning in the 1,930 seconds, oil, gas, and pipeline companies dredged an estimated 10,000 miles or more of dead straight canals through the delta's wetlands, roughly 35,000 individual cuts, to float rigs in, to lay pipe, to reach wellheads. From directly above, the pattern is unmistakable. Natural bayous, meandering like handwriting, interrupted again and again by ruler lines. The dredged spoil was piled along the banks, and researchers calculated that those spoil banks, laid end to end, would cross coastal Louisiana 79 times. The damage is not just the footprint of the canals themselves. Each straight cut is a highway for saltwater into freshwater marsh. The salt kills the plants whose root mats hold the mud together. Storms then strip the dead marsh away. The spoil banks, meanwhile, block the shallow sheet flow of water and sediment the wetlands depend on. The United States Geological Survey ranks the canal network among the primary causes of coastal land loss. Scientists still argue about how much blame belongs to canals versus levees versus extraction, but no one argues the canals are innocent. As of 2010, around 27,000 of those wells were officially abandoned. The infrastructure stayed. The straight lines are still there, still working on the marsh, decades after the last barge left. Notice what this does to the picture. The first invisible system, at Old River, holds the river in. This one lets the Gulf in. The bayou is not untouched wilderness. It is an industrial site with 10,000 miles of roads, made of water, and the roads are eating the neighborhood. Lay two maps of coastal Louisiana side by side, the 1932 survey and the current satellite picture, and the difference is not subtle. The solid boot of the state has frayed. Whole quadrants that were printed as land are now open water, flagged red in the USGS change maps like wounds on an X-ray. The totals from 1932 to 2016, coastal Louisiana lost 2,006 square miles of land. That is roughly a quarter of everything that existed in 1932, an area about the size of Delaware, removed from the United States within living memory. Louisiana accounts for around 90% of all coastal wetland loss in the lower 48 states. This is not a projection about the coming century. It is 90 years of measurement, already banked. The rate is the part that rearranges your sense of time. At the peak in the 1,970 seconds, Louisiana was losing a football field's worth of wetlands every 34 minutes. Restoration work and the exhaustion of the most fragile marsh have slowed it. But the USGS measurement for 2010 to 2016 still came out to a football field roughly every 100 minutes. Every 100 minutes. During the length of this video, somewhere south of Hama or Venice, another few dozen yards of marsh quietly became gulf. On the ground, the loss has a look. Ghost forest sands of dead oaks, killed by salt, still upright in open marsh. Cemeteries where the raised tombs of vanished bayou communities now sit surrounded by water. Roads that end in a boat launch because the town they led to no longer has land under it. This is the Delta's balance sheet with the sediment gone and the canals open. The sinking continues, the rebuilding does not, and it means the printed map is not a picture of the present. It is a photograph of a landform in mid-collapse, already out of date. The map of Louisiana you learned in school is already wrong. A Delaware-sized piece of it has dissolved into the Gulf. Most people file New Orleans under a single sentence. The city that flooded during Katrina and was then protected by a $15 billion wall. The flooding was an event. The fix was an event. The story ended. The ground itself disagrees. About half of New Orleans already sits below sea level, kept dry by continuous mechanical pumping. The city is, functionally, a bowl with machines at the bottom, and the bowl is deepening. The city stands on young delta mud, the same compacting sediment as the marsh, but levied off from the river that once topped it up. In 2025, Tulane researchers published satellite radar measurements covering 2002 to 2020 and found that while much of the city is stable, some neighborhoods and wetlands are subsiding steadily. And in the fastest sinking spots, the rate reaches 25 to 47 millimeters a year, nearly 2 inches annually in the worst locations. Here is the detail that stops people. Among the things measurably sinking are sections of the flood defenses themselves, parts of the post-Katrina hurricane and storm damage risk reduction system, in places losing elevation faster than the sea is rising toward them. The $15 billion shield is standing on the same descending mud as everything it protects, which means it is not a wall so much as a subscription, a defense that has to be rebuilt upward indefinitely in a city where inches decide which blocks flood. You can see the descent at street level without any satellite. Fire hydrants, whose base collars stand inches proud of lawns that have dropped away beneath them. Filled potholes that have become little high spots as the pavement around them continued down. The infrastructure is bolted to one elevation, the delta is leaving for another. New Orleans is not a city that flooded once. It is a city sinking into the delta it is built on, behind walls that are sinking with it. 41%. That is the share of the contiguous United States that drains through this one river mouth. Parts or all of 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces, the third largest drainage basin on Earth after the Amazon and the Congo. Nearly a third of all Americans live on land whose water ends here, which changes what the delta's mud actually is. It is not Louisiana dirt. Pick up a handful of ground in Plaquemines Parish, and you are holding pulverized Montana, ground down Pennsylvania, topsoil that left an Iowa field in a spring rain. The Rockies and the Appalachians, milled fine, floated as much as 2,000 miles and stacked underfoot grain by grain. The delta is not at the end of the river. It is the receipt for 41% of a continent, and the funnel delivers everything the continent sheds, not just its rock. Every summer, nitrogen and phosphorus washed off farmland across the basin pour through the delta into the Gulf, feeding algal blooms that die, sink, and strip the oxygen from the bottom water as they decompose. The result is an annual hypoxic dead zone off the Louisiana coast, water where fish flee and bottom life suffocates. Scientists have surveyed it every year since 1985. The recent 5-year average is about 5,380 square miles. The 2017 record reached 8,776 square miles. The 2025 survey measured 4,402 square miles, a below average year, and still an oxygen-starved area nearly the size of Connecticut, more than double the federal reduction target of 1,900 square miles. Picture the survey itself, the research vessel Pelican out at dawn, hauling an oxygen sensor up through green water. The readout flatlining below 2 milligrams per liter. Shrimp boats cluster at the zone's edge, where the catch begins again. The same delta wetlands support one of America's most productive fisheries, and the same delta funnel delivers the chemistry that suffocates a piece of it each summer. Both are true at once. The delta does not just drain America's heartland. Every summer it converts the Midwest's fertilizer into a suffocation zone you can see from space. Now hold all of it in one frame, because the layers are not separate stories. They are one system, and they interlock. The land is young and temporary by design, a conveyor belt of lobes that was never meant to stay put. The machine at Old River froze the conveyor mid-cycle, pinning the river to a channel it has outgrown. The dams upstream cut the river's sediment supply roughly in half since the 1,950 seconds, and the levees fire what remains off the continental shelf, so the frozen lobe can no longer feed itself. 10,000 miles of industrial canals let the salt in from the other direction. The result is measured, not imagined. 2,000 square miles gone since 1932. A football field roughly every 100 minutes in the most recent survey period. In the middle of the collapse sits a metropolis, half of it below sea level, its brand new defenses subsiding along with the mud they stand on. And the whole apparatus doubles as the drain, for 41% of the country, delivering the interior's fertilizer to the Gulf as an annual Connecticut-sized dead zone. Every piece makes the others worse. The machine that saves the ports starves the marsh. The levees that protect the towns doom the land the towns stand on. The canals that built the energy economy dissolve the storm, buffer the economy needs. There is no villain in the frame and no bystander either. Only a landscape where every act of protection is simultaneously an act of loss. That is the real gap between the map and the place. The map shows a stable coastline, a settled river, a state with a fixed shape. The place is a negotiation, renewed hourly at a set of steel gates in Concordia Parish, and currently running at a loss. Go back to the window seat at 30,000 feet. Same view as before. The fields giving way to marsh, the green lace thinning into open water, the river reaching into the Gulf on its 3 fingers of mud. But you cannot see it the old way now. The lace is not a coastline. It is a dissolve, caught mid-frame. The open water between the marsh threads is the map's future arriving early. The 3 fingers of mud are 1,000 years old and no longer growing. And somewhere upstream, out of sight of the window, 11 steel gates are holding the entire picture in place. The river, pressing toward the Atchafalaya, on one side, 70% of a continent's water being told no on the other. The Mississippi Delta is not a landscape that has always been there, and always will be. It is the one place in America where the ground itself is a decision. Made in 1963, defended in 1973, reinforced every hour since, and where you can stand on land that exists only for as long as the machine keeps winning. If this changed how you see the bottom of the map, subscribe. There is more underneath the familiar places than the maps let on.